The ink on the divorce papers wasn't even dry when Mark looked at his wife of 10 years and laughed in her face. He called her worthless. He told her she was nothing but a passenger in his life, and now he was evicting her from his world. He thought he had won. He thought he had taken everything from Sarah. But Mark made one fatal calculation. He forgot that rock bottom is where the strongest foundations are built. He had no idea that the woman he was throwing away was about to be caught by the one man Mark feared most. Watch closely, because the look on Mark's face when Sarah walks back into his life isn't just regret, it's pure terror. The conference room on the 45th floor of the fictionalized Halloway & Associates law firm in downtown Manhattan was freezing, kept at a temperature meant to keep minds sharp and emotions cool. But for Sarah Miller, the cold felt like it was seeping into her very marrow. Across the mahogany table sat Mark Miller, the man she had loved since they were sophomores at NYU. He was checking his watch, a platinum Patek Philippe that cost more than Sarah's father had made in a decade. He tapped his fingers on the glass surface, impatient, radiating a distinct aura of annoyance rather than remorse. "Come on, Sarah," Mark said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's not drag this out. I have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin in 45 minutes, and I really don't want to be late. The investors for the Apex Tech merger are flying in." Sarah looked down at the documents in front of her. The settlement agreement. It was a generous title for what was essentially an unconditional surrender. "Mark," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to steel herself. "This leaves me with almost nothing. The house, the stocks, even the joint savings. You moved it all." Mark scoffed, leaning back in his leather chair. A smirk played on his lips, the same smirk that had once charmed her, now twisted into something cruel. Beside him, his lawyer, a shark-like man named Mr. Henderson, didn't even look up from his tablet. "Sarah, look at me," Mark commanded. When she raised her tear-filled eyes, he shook his head. "I built this empire. Me. My late nights, my stress, my genius. You planned dinner parties. You picked out curtains. You were a passenger, Sarah. A very expensive passenger. And frankly, the ride is over. I need a partner who matches my trajectory, not an anchor dragging me down." "I supported you," Sarah said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "When you were coding in our basement apartment, who paid the rent, who worked 2 shifts at the diner so you didn't have to take a corporate job. I gave up my acceptance to law school for you." Mark let out a loud, genuine laugh. It echoed off the glass walls. "Oh, please, don't rewrite history to make yourself a martyr. That was 10 years ago. You made an investment and it didn't pay out the way you wanted. That's business. Now sign the papers. I'm offering you $50,000. It's enough to get a studio apartment in Queens and start over. More than you deserve, frankly." The door to the conference room opened and a woman walked in. She was stunning tall, wearing a crimson dress that hugged every curve, and at least 10 years younger than Sarah. It was Chloe, Mark's executive assistant. "Mark, the car is downstairs," Chloe said, her voice smooth like syrup. She glanced at Sarah, her eyes flicking over Sarah's 3-year-old cardigan and tired face with undisguised pity. "Oh, are we still doing this?" "Just finishing up," Mark said, his tone instantly shifting to warmth as he looked at Chloe. He turned back to Sarah, his face hardening. "Sign it, Sarah, or I withdraw the $50,000 offer and my lawyers will bury you in litigation until you're living in a shelter. Do the smart thing for once in your life." Sarah looked at the pen. She looked at Chloe, who was already checking her reflection in the window. She looked at Mark, the man who had promised to love her until death. She realized then that the man she loved was already dead. This monster was a stranger. With a shaking hand, Sarah picked up the pen. She didn't sign it because she was weak. She signed it because she wanted to be away from the toxicity. She scribbled her name, Sarah Miller. "Excellent," Mr. Henderson said, snatching the papers away the moment the ink hit the page. Mark stood up, buttoning his bespoke Italian suit jacket. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't say goodbye. He walked over to Chloe, placing a hand on the small of her back. At the door he paused and looked back at Sarah, who was sitting alone in the vast cold room. "Do me a favor, Sarah," Mark said, a cruel glint in his eye. Change your last name back to whatever it was before. I need the Miller brand to remain untarnished by failure. He walked out, Chloe laughing at something he whispered, leaving Sarah in the silence of the 45th floor. The reality of Sarah's new life hit her not in a courtroom, but in the grocery store aisle 3 weeks later. She was standing in front of the pasta sauce, calculating the difference between the generic brand and the one she used to buy. The difference was 80 cents. She put the generic jar in her basket. The $50,000 Mark had gifted her had evaporated faster than she could have imagined. First and last month's rent on a small drafty apartment in a rougher part of the city had taken a chunk. Then there were the debts credit cards that Mark had insisted were in her name for credit building, but were maxed out with his expenses that the prenup didn't cover. By the time she settled the immediate fires, she had less than $4,000 to her name. She had applied to dozens of jobs. But a 10-year gap in her resume was a red flag that no amount of household management experience could explain away. She was 32 years old with a half-finished degree and a wardrobe that belonged to a life she could no longer afford. Her phone buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram. Against her better judgment, she opened it. It was a photo from the City Business Gala. There was Mark looking dashing in a tuxedo holding a champagne flute. On his arm was Chloe wearing a diamond necklace that Sarah recognized it was a piece Mark had bought for their 5th anniversary, claiming it was an investment. The caption read, "Power couple Mark Miller and Chloe Evans, celebrating the upcoming merger with NextCorp. The sky is the limit." Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. She locked her phone and shoved it into her pocket, her eyes stinging. She paid for her groceries, pasta bread, peanut butter, and instant coffee, and walked out into the pouring rain. Her car, a 10-year-old sedan that Mark had generously allowed her to keep, wouldn't start. "No, no, no," Sarah pleaded, turning the key. The engine sputtered and died. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel and finally let the tears come. She cried for the law degree she never got. She cried for the baby they had tried to have but couldn't. She cried for the wasted decade of ironing his shirts and soothing his ego. A sharp rap on the window made her jump. She looked up to see a police officer. "Ma'am, you can't idle here. You're blocking the loading zone." "It won't start," Sarah choked out, rolling down the window. "Then you'll need a tow. I have to ticket you if you stay," the officer said, indifferent to her red eyes. Sarah nodded, defeated. She called a tow truck, which cost her another $200 she didn't have. She ended up walking the last 6 blocks to her apartment in the rain, carrying her grocery bags. One of the bags ripped halfway there, sending the jar of generic pasta sauce shattering onto the pavement. She stood there staring at the red splatter mixing with the dirty rainwater. It looked like a crime scene. "Need a hand?" a deep, gravelly voice asked from behind her. Sarah spun around, defensive. A man was standing there under a black umbrella. He looked rough. He was wearing a worn-out gray hoodie, dark jeans, and scuffed boots. A baseball cap was pulled low over his eyes, obscuring most of his face, but she could see a heavy stubble and a strong jawline. He looked like a construction worker getting off a late shift, or perhaps someone who was just as down on his luck as she was. "I don't have any money," Sarah said instinctively, taking a step back. The man chuckled, a low rumbling sound. "I didn't ask for money. I asked if you needed a hand." He didn't wait for permission. He crouched down and began picking up the unbroken items, the peanut butter, the bread. He took off his hoodie, revealing a plain black t-shirt underneath, and wrapped the broken glass shards in the hoodie to clear the sidewalk. "That's your hoodie," Sarah exclaimed. "You'll ruin it." "It's just clothes," the man said. He stood up, handing her the salvaged groceries. His eyes met hers for a brief second. They were an intense, piercing blue, startlingly bright against his weathered appearance. "You look like you're having a hell of a day, miss." "You have no idea," Sarah muttered, wiping rain from her face. "Thank you, really." "I'm Sebastian," he said, extending a hand. It was rough, calloused. "Sarah," she replied, taking it. "Well, Sarah," Sebastian said, looking at the red sauce on the ground. Looks like dinner is ruined. I know a place around the corner that serves the best clam chowder in the city. Cheap, too. My treat. Sarah hesitated. Stranger danger was real. But there was something about this man, a quiet, grounded solidity that felt the opposite of Mark's frantic, superficial energy. And she was starving. "I can't let you pay," she said. "You ruined your hoodie for me." "Consider it an investment," Sebastian said with a faint smile. "I hate eating alone." Sarah didn't know it then, standing in the rain with a ruined jar of sauce and a broken heart. But she had just shaken the hand of the only man in the city who had more money than Mark Miller. She had just met Sebastian Sterling, the reclusive heir to the Sterling shipping fortune, a man who had vanished from the public eye 5 years ago. And he wasn't looking for a business partner. He was looking for something real. The clam chowder at Joe's Diner was hot, thick, and surprisingly good, but Sarah could barely taste it. She was too busy trying to keep her hands from shaking as she held the spoon. Across the chipped laminate table, Sebastian ate with a quiet, efficient hunger. He didn't stare at her, didn't push her to talk, and didn't offer empty platitudes about how everything happens for a reason. He just offered a presence, a solid anchor in the storm that had become her life. "So," Sebastian said after pushing his empty bowl away, "you have a car that won't start a husband who, if I'm reading the body language correctly, is an ex-husband, and a jar of pasta sauce that met a tragic end. What's the plan for tomorrow?" Sarah laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Wake up. Don't check my bank account. Try to find a job that doesn't require a reference from the last 10 years. "What are you good at?" Sebastian asked. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her with assessment. It was the look of a mechanic diagnosing an engine or a general surveying a battlefield. "I used to be good at managing a life," Sarah said, tracing the condensation on her water glass. "I managed the contractors for our renovations. I organized charity galas for Mark's company. I balanced the household budget to the penny so he could reinvest every dollar into his startup. I'm good at logistics. I'm good at making things run smoothly while staying invisible." Sebastian nodded slowly. Logistics. The invisible art. People only notice logistics when they fail. "Exactly," Sarah said, surprised he understood. Most people thought she just sat at home eating bonbons. "I might know a guy," Sebastian said casually. "Runs a high-end catering outfit, Silver Spoon Events. They handle the big corporate gigs downtown. They need people who can handle pressure and organize chaos. It's hard work, long hours on your feet, but the tips are cash." "I'll take it," Sarah said immediately. She didn't care about the prestige. She needed survival. The next 6 months were a blur of exhaustion and grit. Sarah Miller, who had once hosted dinner parties for Manhattan's elite, was now clearing their plates. She worked 60-hour weeks wearing a black vest and tie, carrying heavy trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres until her feet bled. But she survived. She moved into a tiny studio apartment in Astoria. It had a leaky faucet and the radiator clanked like a dying tank, but it was hers. And every Tuesday and Friday night Sebastian came over. He never arrived empty-handed. Sometimes it was a bag of fresh bagels. Other times a bottle of wine that tasted far too expensive for a construction worker to afford, though he claimed he got a deal from a buddy. They fell into a routine. Sebastian fixed her leaky faucet. He rewired the faulty outlet in her kitchen. He even got her car running again, claiming it just needed a new alternator and some tinkering. Sarah assumed he picked up the parts from a junkyard. She had no idea he had ordered a custom OEM part from Germany and installed it himself in the middle of the night. She fell in love with him slowly, then all at once. She loved his calloused hands, his quiet humor, and the way he listened to her talk about her day as if she were detailing a military campaign. She loved that he had nothing, no fancy suits, no sports cars, no ego. He was just a man who saw her when she felt invisible. But while Sarah was rebuilding her soul, Mark Miller was busy conquering the world. Apex Tech had gone public. Mark's face was on the cover of Forbes and Fortune. He was dubbed the visionary of the new age. He and Chloe were the city's golden couple, seen at every premiere and gala. Sarah tried to ignore it. She blocked the news sites. She changed the channel. But you can't hide from a hurricane when you live in a glass house. It happened on a rainy Tuesday in November. Sarah was working a shift for Silver Spoon at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was the annual Innovators Ball, a ticket that cost $25,000. Sarah was assigned to the VIP section, an elevated platform overlooking the Temple of Dender. She was passing a tray of Wagyu sliders when she froze. There, sitting at the center table, was Mark. He was laughing, holding a glass of scotch, surrounded by sycophants. Chloe sat next to him, wearing a dress that shimmered like liquid gold. She looked bored, scrolling through her phone while men twice her age tried to impress her. Sarah turned to flee to swap sections with another server, but it was too late. "Waiter!" Mark's voice boomed. He snapped his fingers. Sarah froze. Her back was to him. "Waiter, we need more champagne here, and bring the sliders. The good ones," Mark commanded. Sarah took a deep breath. She had a job to do. She needed this paycheck to cover her heating bill. "You are invisible," she told herself. "You are just a uniform." She turned around, keeping her head low, and approached the table. She placed the tray down with trembling hands. "Here you go, sir," she whispered. Mark paused. He recognized the voice. The table went silent as Mark slowly looked up. His eyes widened, first in shock, and then a slow, malicious grin spread across his face. "Well, well, well," Mark said, his voice loud enough to carry to the neighboring tables. "Look who we have here, everyone. It's Sarah." Chloe looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Oh my God, is that your ex-wife?" "The one and only," Mark chuckled. He stood up, towering over Sarah. He looked at her cheap uniform, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, the fatigue etched under her eyes. "I told you to change your name, Sarah. Seeing Miller on a name tag like this, it's bad for the brand." "I'm just doing my job, Mark," Sarah said, her face burning. "Please." "Just doing her job," Mark repeated to the table. The wealthy guest chuckled nervously, sensing the blood in the water. Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out his money clip. He peeled off a crisp $100 bill. "Here," Mark said, tucking the bill into the breast pocket of her vest. "For old time's sake, buy yourself something nice. Maybe some anti-aging cream. You look tired." The humiliation was physical. It felt like a slap. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She grabbed the bill, crumpled it, and threw it on the table. "I don't want your money, Mark. I never did." "That's not what your divorce lawyer said." Mark shot back, his eyes cold. "Now run along. We need fresh drinks. And send someone else. You're depressing the atmosphere." Sarah turned and walked away. She didn't run. She walked with a stiff, unnatural gait, holding her breath until she reached the kitchen. She threw her apron into the laundry bin, walked out the back door into the rain, and didn't stop walking until she reached the subway. She didn't know that across the room, in the shadows of the Egyptian wing, a man in a black tuxedo had been watching the entire exchange. He wasn't sitting at a table. He was standing with the security detail blending in so perfectly that no one noticed him. Sebastian Sterling's blue eyes were no longer warm. They were shards of ice. He watched Mark Miller laugh and high-five a banker. Sebastian reached into his pocket, pulled out a burner phone, and dialed a number. "It's me," Sebastian said, his voice low and dangerous. "Initiate Protocol 4, and get me the file on Apex Tech, specifically their debt structuring and the leverage held by the Vanguard Group." "Sir." The voice on the other end hesitated. "That's a hostile move. You've been dormant for 5 years. If you do this, the market will know you're back." "I don't care," Sebastian said, his gaze fixed on Mark Miller's arrogant grin. "Burn it down. Start tomorrow." Sarah didn't leave her apartment for 2 days. She called in sick to the catering company, curling up under her duvet, replaying the scene in the museum over and over. The look in Chloe's eyes, the pity mixed with disgust, was worse than Mark's cruelty. It confirmed her deepest fear that she was nothing, just a discard pile in the game of life. On the evening of the second day, a knock on her door made her jump. "Sarah, it's me, Sebastian." She didn't want him to see her like this, swollen eyes wearing oversized sweatpants surrounded by used tissues. But he had a key. He had made a copy weeks ago when she locked herself out. The lock turned and Sebastian walked in. He wasn't wearing his usual hoodie and jeans. He was wearing a dark wool pea coat and tailored trousers. He looked sharper. He carried a distinct energy, a vibration of contained power that she hadn't felt from him before. "I heard what happened," Sebastian said softly, closing the door behind him. Sarah sat up, pulling the blanket around her. "How did it make the gossip columns tech mogul hires ex-wife as waitress?" "I have ears," Sebastian said vaguely. He sat on the edge of the bed and reached out, brushing a stray hair from her face. "He hurt you. He humiliated me," Sarah corrected, her voice breaking. "He made sure everyone knew I was beneath him. And the worst part is, he's right. Look at me, Sebastian. I'm 33. I serve appetizers to people I used to have dinner with, and I live in a box." "You are worth 10 of him," Sebastian said intensely. "Mark Miller is a hollow suit. He's built a house of cards on cheap debt and stolen ideas. He doesn't know real value." "Value doesn't pay rent," Sarah whispered. Sebastian stood up. He paced the small room, a restless energy coming off him. He stopped in front of the window, looking out at the brick wall of the adjacent building. "Sarah, do you trust me?" "Of course," she said, confused. "You fixed my car. You fixed my sink. You listened to me. I need you to trust me on something bigger." Sebastian turned to face her. "Next Saturday is the Grand Meridian Gala. It's the biggest business event on the East Coast. Every CEO, every investor, every shark in the water will be there, including Mark." "I can't work that event." Sarah shook her head frantically. "I can't see him again." "I don't want you to work it," Sebastian said. "I want you to attend it. With me." Sarah blinked, confused. A nervous laugh escaped her lips. "Sebastian tickets are $5,000 a plate. And look at us. We can't just walk in there. You need a tuxedo. I need a gown. We'd look like we're wearing costumes." Sebastian walked back to the bed. He took her hands in his. His grip was firm, grounding. "Sarah, there is something I haven't told you. I didn't tell you because I needed to know that someone could love Sebastian the man, not Sebastian the name." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about? Are you in trouble? Are you running from someone?" "No." Sebastian smiled, a wry, crooked smile. "I'm not running. I'm just retired. Or I was." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a black card. It wasn't a credit card. It was a heavy titanium identification card with a holographic chip. It simply said, Sterling in silver lettering. "My full name is Sebastian Arthur Sterling." The name hung in the air like a dropped weight. Sarah stared at him. The name Sterling was legendary. The Sterling family had owned the shipyards in Brooklyn before the city was even a city. They owned half the commercial real estate on the eastern seaboard. They were old money, quiet money, the kind of money that didn't scream. It whispered, and governments listened. "Sterling," Sarah whispered. "Like the shipping company, and the private equity firm, and the real estate trust," Sebastian clarified. "I walked away 5 years ago after my father died. I was sick of the fakes, the users, the Chloes of the world. I wanted to live a simple life. I wanted to see if I could be happy with just a tool belt and a quiet apartment." "You're a billionaire," Sarah said, pulling her hands away as if burned. "You've been lying to me this whole time. The clam chowder, the broken-down truck." "The truck is real. I love that truck," Sebastian said earnestly. "And I wasn't lying about who I am. I am the guy who likes cheap diners and fixing things. That is the real me. The guy in the suit, that's the mask. But for you, I'm willing to put the mask back on." Sarah stood up, her mind reeling. The betrayal and the shock warred with the realization of what this meant. Why tell me now? Because Mark Miller needs to be taught a lesson. Sebastian's voice dropped, becoming cold and hard, the voice of a titan. And because I want to take you to that ball, not as a +1, but as the future Mrs. Sterling, if you'll have me. Sarah gasped. You're proposing now in my sweatpants. I'm stating my intentions, Sebastian said. But first we have work to do. Mark thinks you're debris. I want to show him you're the asteroid that's about to wipe him out. He checked his watch, a simple Timex he had swapped for the Patek Philippe he kept in a safe. Pack a bag, Sarah. We're not staying here tonight. My driver is downstairs. Driver. The penthouse at the plaza is already prepped, Sebastian said. Tomorrow morning a team from Valentino is coming to see you. Then Harry Winston. We aren't renting a dress, Sarah. We're buying the collection. Sarah looked at the man she thought was a construction worker. She saw the love in his eyes, but also the steel. She realized that Mark had played checkers, but Sebastian played 4D chess. She thought of Mark's sneer. Change your name. She looked at Sebastian. Okay, she said, a fire igniting in her belly that she hadn't felt in years. Let's go. The next week was a whirlwind that felt like a fever dream. Sarah was whisked from the leaking apartment in Astoria to a world of hushed luxury she hadn't even known existed. When she was with Mark, luxury was loud, flashy logos, noisy cars, trendy restaurants. With Sebastian, luxury was silent. It was doors opening before you reached them. It was clothes that didn't have labels because they were made for your body alone. She learned that the Sterling name was a passkey to the city. When she walked into a boutique with Sebastian, the managers didn't just assist her. They evacuated the store so she could shop in peace. But Sebastian wasn't just dressing her up. He was preparing her. Mark's company Apex is vulnerable, Sebastian explained one night over dinner in the penthouse. He had spread documents out on the dining table. He over-leveraged to buy out his competitors. He has a debt payment due next month of $40 million. He's banking on a new round of funding from the Vanguard Group to cover it. And if he doesn't get it? Sarah asked, sipping a vintage red wine. Then he defaults. The stock crashes. He loses everything, Sebastian said calmly. And who controls the Vanguard Group? Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. Sebastian smiled, swirling his wine. A holding company called North Star, which is wholly owned by the Sterling Trust. Sarah's eyes widened. You own his debt. I bought it yesterday, Sebastian said. Mark is walking into that gala thinking he's about to be crowned king. He has no idea his executioner is going to be sitting at the head table. The night of the Grand Meridian Gala arrived. Sarah stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hotel suite. She barely recognized herself. She was wearing a midnight blue gown by Oscar de la Renta, structured yet flowing with a neckline that showcased the diamond and sapphire necklace resting against her skin, a piece from the Sterling family vault rumored to have belonged to European royalty. Her hair was swept up in an elegant loose chignon. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting her eyes, making them look fierce and intelligent. She didn't look like a trophy wife. She looked like a queen. Sebastian walked in, adjusting his cufflinks. He wore a tuxedo that fit him so perfectly it looked like a second skin. He looked powerful, dangerous, and impossibly handsome. You look... Sebastian paused, his voice catching. You look like the woman you were always meant to be. I'm nervous, Sarah admitted. Mark will be there. Chloe will be there. Let them be there, Sebastian said, offering her his arm. They are playing a game of popularity. We are playing a game of ownership. He led her to the elevator. Downstairs, a Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting, its engine purring silently. As they drove through the city streets toward the venue, Sarah watched the lights pass by. She thought of the woman standing in the rain with the broken pasta sauce. That woman felt a lifetime away. Ready? Sebastian asked as the car slowed down in front of the red carpet. The flash bulbs were already popping, blinding white lights exploding against the tinted windows. Sarah took a deep breath. She thought of Mark's laugh. She thought of the $100 bill. "I'm ready," she said. The chauffeur opened the door. Sebastian stepped out first, and a hush went through the crowd of paparazzi. They didn't recognize him immediately. He had been a ghost for years. But they recognized the bearing of a man who owned the pavement he stood on. He reached a hand back into the car. Sarah placed her hand in his. She stepped out into the night, the diamonds at her throat catching the flash of 1,000 cameras. The whisper started low and grew into a roar. "Is that... Who is she? Wait, isn't that Sebastian Sterling?" And somewhere inside the ballroom, Mark Miller was raising a glass, completely unaware that the roof was about to cave in. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties and designer silk. The air smelled of expensive perfume, truffle oil, and raw ambition. In the center of the room, Mark Miller held court. He was standing near the ice sculpture, swirling a glass of scotch, surrounded by a group of nervous junior investors who hung on his every word. "The key to the market," Mark pontificated, gesturing grandly, "is aggression. You take what you want. If you wait for permission, you're already dead. That's how I build Apex. By being a predator, not prey." Chloe, standing beside him, checked her reflection in her compact mirror, looking bored. She was scanning the room for photographers, annoyed that the flashes weren't currently directed at her. "Mark," she interrupted, "why is it so quiet?" Mark frowned and turned around. The low hum of conversation in the massive hall had died down, replaced by a ripple of whispers that moved like a wave from the entrance toward the stage. "Probably some politician walked in," Mark dismissed. "Or a movie star, nobody important." But the crowd was parting. They weren't just stepping aside. They were creating a wide avenue of respect. Walking down that avenue was a couple that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. The man was tall, dark, and radiated an aura of absolute command. But it was the woman on his arm who made Mark choke on his scotch. She was breathtaking. Her midnight blue gown shimmered under the chandeliers, and her posture was regal. She didn't look down. She looked straight ahead, her eyes cool and confident. "Is that..." Chloe squinted, her mouth falling open. "Mark, that looks like Sarah." "Don't be stupid," Mark snapped through his heart hammered against his ribs. "Sarah is serving pigs in a blanket in Queens right now. That woman is... well, she's stunning. She looks like royalty." As the couple drew closer, the whispers became audible. "It's Sebastian Sterling. I thought he was dead." "No, he's back. And look at the rock on her finger." Mark froze. He knew the name Sebastian Sterling. Everyone did. Sterling was the whale that swallowed sharks like Mark for breakfast. If Sterling was here, the hierarchy of the room had just shifted violently. Mark, ever the opportunist, straightened his tie. "I'm going to introduce myself," he told Chloe. "If I can get Sterling on board as an angel investor, we're untouchable." He pushed his way through the crowd, an eager smile plastered on his face, blocking the couple's path near the center fountain. "Mr. Sterling," Mark boomed, extending a hand. "Mark Miller, CEO of Apex Tech." "It is an honor, sir, a true honor. We've been dying to get a meeting with your firm." Sebastian stopped. He looked down at Mark's hand, then up at his face. He didn't shake it. He just stared, his blue eyes cold as liquid nitrogen. "Miller," Sebastian said, his voice deep and smooth. "I'm familiar with your work." "Excellent," Mark beamed, dropping his hand but keeping the smile. "And who is this lovely creature you must introduce me?" Mark turned his charm on the woman, preparing his most seductive smile. The woman turned her head slowly. She looked Mark dead in the eye. "Hello, Mark," she said. The glass of scotch slipped from Mark's fingers. It hit the marble floor and shattered, splashing amber liquid onto his patent leather shoes. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of the nearby crowd. "Sarah," Mark wheezed. He looked at the diamonds around her neck. He looked at the way she held herself. This wasn't the defeated woman in the cardigan. This was a stranger. "You know each other," Sebastian asked, feigning ignorance, though his grip on Sarah's arm tightened possessively. She's my ex-wife. Mark stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. He looked from Sarah to Sebastian, his brain failing to compute the data. Sarah, what are you doing here? Did you sneak in? Is this a catering gig? It was a desperate attempt to put her back in her box, to make her small so he could feel big again. Chloe appeared at Mark's elbow, looking Sarah up and down with undisguised jealousy. Oh, honey, did you rent that dress? Be careful not to spill anything on it. The deposit must have been your whole year's salary. Sarah smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who knows the trap has already snapped shut. Actually, Chloe, Sarah said, her voice calm and carrying perfectly over the crowd. Sebastian bought it for me, along with the necklace. He thought it would match the engagement ring. She raised her left hand. The diamond was massive, a flawless emerald cut that caught the light and blinded the onlookers. Mark felt like he had been punched in the gut. Engagement you with him. Is there a problem, Mr. Miller? Sebastian stepped forward, towering over Mark. You seem surprised that I would want to marry a woman of such integrity, loyalty, and brilliance. Qualities I understand you failed to appreciate. She's a housewife, Mark sputtered, losing his composure. She's a nobody. She has nothing. She has me, Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. And she has half of my assets as of this morning, which makes her, statistically speaking, about 50 times wealthier than you are right now. The crowd gasped. Phones were out. People were recording. This is ridiculous. Mark laughed nervously, looking around for support. Sterling, she's playing you. She's a gold digger. She bled me dry, and now she's doing it to you. Bled you dry. Sarah stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Mark, why left with $50,000? You kept the millions. You kept the house. You kept the cars. I didn't fight you because I just wanted to be free of you. But you couldn't let it go, could you? You had to come to my job. You had to humiliate me. You had to tip me $100. Sarah reached into her clutch. She pulled out a crisp, crumpled $100 bill. Here, she said. She tucked the bill into the breast pocket of Mark's tuxedo, mirroring exactly what he had done to her at the museum. Keep it. You're going to need it more than I do. Mark stood frozen, the bill sticking out of his pocket like a flag of surrender. Let's go, darling, Sebastian said, guiding Sarah past him. We have the best table in the house, and Mr. Miller has a very difficult evening ahead of him. Mark stumbled back to his table, his face burning. The whispers were louder now, and they were laughing at him. Chloe was furiously texting on her phone, ignoring him. Put the phone away, Mark hissed. It's a bluff. Sterling is just trying to intimidate me. Apex is strong. We have the Vanguard funding coming through tomorrow. Mark, Chloe said, looking up, her face pale. Look at the news. She shoved her phone in his face. A headline from the Wall Street Journal had just dropped. Vanguard Group announces acquisition of distressed assets. Apex Tech debt called in. What? Mark grabbed the phone. That's impossible. Vanguard promised to roll the debt over. If they call it in, we're insolvent. We're bankrupt. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the main stage. The host, a famous news anchor, tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Tonight we have a surprise keynote speaker. Please welcome the chairman of the Sterling Trust, Mr. Sebastian Sterling. Mark's blood ran cold. Sebastian walked onto the stage. He didn't need notes. He gripped the podium and looked out at the audience, his eyes locking instantly onto table 12 where Mark sat sweating. Good evening, Sebastian began. Business is often described as a jungle, survival of the fittest. We are told that to succeed we must be ruthless. We must discard people like assets when they no longer serve our bottom line. The room was silent. I used to believe that, Sebastian continued, until I met someone who taught me that the true measure of wealth isn't what you hoard, but who you stand by when the rain comes. My fiancée, Sarah. Spotlight swung to Sarah, who remained seated, looking gracious and humble. Applause rippled through the room. However, Sebastian's tone hardened. There is a rot in our industry. Companies built on smoke and mirrors. CEOs who treat human beings as disposable. Tonight, the Sterling Trust is announcing a new direction. We are acquiring the debt of several failing tech companies to restructure them with ethical leadership. He paused for effect. Our first acquisition is Apex Tech. Mark stood up, knocking his chair over. You can't do that, he shouted, forgetting where he was. This is a hostile takeover. It's not a takeover, Mark, Sebastian said into the microphone, his voice booming through the speakers. It's a foreclosure. You missed your payment deadline at 5:00 p.m. today. You were too busy getting dressed for this party to read your email. Mark frantically checked his phone. There it was. An email from his CFO sent 3 hours ago, buried under his social media notifications. Urgent Vanguard demanding payment immediately. Vanguard, Mark whispered. You own Vanguard. Through a subsidiary, yes. Sebastian nodded. And as the new owner of Apex Tech, my first act is a change in management. You're fired, Mark. The room erupted. It wasn't polite applause anymore. It was shock and awe. This was a public execution. Mark turned to Chloe. We have to go. We have to fix this. Call my lawyer. Chloe didn't move. She was looking at Mark with the same expression she had used on Sarah months ago, pure disgust. I don't think so, Mark, Chloe said, grabbing her purse. What? You're leaving me? Mark gaped. Now, when I need you. You said it yourself, Mark, Chloe said, standing up and smoothing her dress. You need a partner who matches your trajectory, and frankly, your trajectory is heading straight into the sewer. I'm not an anchor. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Mark stood alone. The waiters were clearing the plates around him. The investors at his table had already scattered, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of his failure. He looked up at the stage. Sebastian had stepped down and was walking back to Sarah. He kissed her hand, and she looked up at him with a love that Mark realized with a sickening jolt she had once looked at him with. He had held a diamond in his hand and traded it for a rhinestone. Security guards approached the table. Mr. Miller, the head of security said firmly, we've been asked to escort you off the premises. You're causing a disturbance. I'm the CEO, Mark screamed as they grabbed his arms. I built this. I'm Mark Miller. Not anymore, sir, the guard said, dragging him toward the exit. The cool night air outside the plaza felt good on Sarah's skin. The gala was over. They had stayed for the dessert dancing once in the center of the floor while the world watched, but eventually the noise became too much. They stood on the sidewalk waiting for the Rolls-Royce. Down the block, a figure was sitting on the curb, head in his hands. It was Mark. His tie was undone, his jacket was missing, and he looked like a broken man. Sebastian tensed, ready to step in, but Sarah put a hand on his chest. Wait, she said. I need 1 minute. I'll be right here, Sebastian said, leaning against the car door, his eyes never leaving Mark. Sarah walked over to the curb. The click of her heels on the pavement made Mark look up. His eyes were red, rimmed with exhaustion and shock. When he saw her, he didn't sneer. He didn't yell. He just looked small. You took everything, Mark whispered hoarsely. My company, my reputation, my life. I didn't take anything, Mark, Sarah said softly. You gave it away. You bet it all on your ego and you lost. I can get it back, Mark muttered, a frantic glint returning to his eye. I can start over. I'm a genius. I'll build something bigger. Maybe, Sarah said. But you'll have to do it alone. No one to manage the books. No one to pack your lunch. No one to believe in you when the world doesn't. You wanted to be a solo act. Congratulations. The stage is yours. Sarah, Mark's voice cracked. I messed up. Okay, I messed up. Chloe was nothing. She was just flash. You were real. Maybe we can talk. Maybe I can fix this. Sarah looked down at him. She searched her heart for anger, for hate, even for pity. But she found nothing, just a vast, quiet indifference. "There's nothing to fix, Mark," she said. "The Sarah you knew doesn't exist anymore. You killed her in that lawyer's office. And I want to thank you for that, because if you hadn't broken me, I never would have built myself back up into someone you can never reach." She turned around. "Sarah," Mark called out, desperation in his voice. "Sarah, please, I have nowhere to go tonight. My cards are frozen. Can you just spot me for a cab?" Sarah stopped. She didn't look back. "Check your pocket," she said. Mark reached into his breast pocket. His fingers closed around the crumpled $100 bill she had stuffed there earlier. The tip. "Invest it wisely," she called out. She walked back to the car where Sebastian was waiting. He opened the door for her, his face softening as she approached. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm perfect," Sarah said, sliding into the leather seat. As the car pulled away, merging into the stream of New York traffic, Sarah didn't look out the back window. She looked at Sebastian, who was holding her hand, his thumb tracing the line of her knuckles. 1 year later. The coffee shop in Brooklyn was bustling. Sarah sat at a corner table reviewing the blueprints for the new community center the Sterling Foundation was building in the Bronx. She was the executive director, now using her organizational skills to manage millions of dollars in philanthropy. Sebastian walked in carrying 2 coffees. He was wearing his old gray hoodie and jeans. Despite the billions in the bank on Saturdays, he was still just the guy who liked cheap coffee and fixing things. "Site manager says the foundation is poured," Sebastian said, sitting down and sliding a latte toward her. "We're ahead of schedule." "Good?" Sarah smiled, taking a sip. "I want it open by Christmas." She glanced out the window. Across the street, a man was delivering food on a bicycle. He was struggling with a heavy insulated bag, pedaling hard against the wind. He looked tired, older than his years. It was Mark. He stopped at a red light, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked miserable. "Is that him?" Sebastian asked quietly, following her gaze. "Yeah," Sarah said. "Do you want to go say hello?" Sebastian asked. "Or maybe order a delivery?" Sarah watched the light turn green. Mark pushed off, wobbling, slightly disappearing into the city traffic, just another anonymous face in the grind. "No," Sarah said, turning back to her blueprints. "I have work to do." She took Sebastian's hand. The past was a lesson. The present was a gift. And the future, it belonged to them. And that, my friends, is the ultimate revenge. Sarah didn't just get even. She moved on and leveled up. Mark learned the hard way that when you treat people like trash, eventually, you're the one who gets taken out with the garbage. I absolutely loved the moment she told him to check his pocket for that $100 bill. Talk about poetic justice. What did you think of the ending? Do you think Mark deserved to lose everything, or was it too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow so I can bring you more dramatic stories like this one. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.